Selections from Beethoven Letters, Journals, and Conversations, edited, translated, introduced by Michael Hamburger. From Mozart by Otto Jahn. Beethoven, who, as a very promising young man, came to Vienna in the spring of 1787, but had to return home to Bonn after a brief stay, was taken to see Mozart, who asked him to play something. Mozart, thinking that he was listening to some studied showpiece, praised it rather coolly. Beethoven, who noticed this, asked Mozart for a theme suitable for improvised variations. As he always played excellently when excited, and at this moment was also inspired by the presence of a master whom he respected greatly, Beethoven began to perform upon the piano in such a manner that Mozart, whose attention increased to the point of fascination, at last went quietly to his friends sitting in the next room and said emphatically, "Keep your eyes on that fellow. One day he'll give the world something to talk about." To Councillor von Schaden, Bonn, Autumn, 1787. Noble and most esteemed friend, I can easily imagine what you are thinking of me, and I cannot deny that you have good grounds for not thinking favorably of me. Yet I shall not attempt to excuse myself till I have pointed out my reasons for hoping that my excuses will be accepted. I must confess to you that ever since the time when I left Augsburg, my good spirits, and with them my health, began to decline. The nearer I came to my native city, the more letters I received from my father asking me to travel faster than usual, as my mother was not in a good state of health. I therefore hurried on as fast as I could, though far from well myself. The desire to be able to see my sick mother in time helped me to overcome every obstacle and to endure hardest privations. I found my mother still alive, but in the most wretched state. She was ill with consumption and died about 7 weeks ago after much pain and suffering. She was such a kind and lovable mother to me, my best friend. Oh, who was happier than I when I could still utter the sweet name of mother? And it would be heard, and to whom can I say it now? To the dumb images that resemble her, put together by my imagination? I have spent very few pleasant hours since I came here. All the time I have been afflicted with asthma I have reason to fear may even turn into consumption. In addition to this, there is melancholy, which to me is an evil almost as great as my illness itself. Just imagine yourself in my place, and I shall hope to obtain your forgiveness for my long silence. As for the extreme kindness you showed me in Augsburg in lending me 3 carolines, I must beg you to be indulgent with me a little longer. My journey has been a great expense, and there is no hope of obtaining the least compensation in this place. Fate is not well disposed to me here in Bonn. You will pardon me for detaining you with so much chatter. All of it was relevant to my apology. I beg you not to deprive me of your valuable friendship in future, for I desire nothing so much as to become worthy of your friendship in some way. With the highest respect, I am your obedient servant and friend, Ludwig van Beethoven, Count Organist to the Elector of Cologne. Lines inscribed in a friend's album about 1792 to 93. I am not wicked, fiery blood is all my malice, and my crime is youth. Wicked I am not, truly I am not wicked. Though wild upsurgings often may plead against my heart is good. To help wherever one can, love, liberty above all things, never deny the truth, even at the foot of the throne. From a diary, December 1795. Courage, even with all the frailties of my body, my spirit shall dominate. 25 years have come. This year must decide the mature man. Nothing must remain. From Carl Czerny's Reminiscences of Beethoven. Yet at that time, 1798 to 99, he did not show the slightest sign of being hard of hearing. I had to play something at once, and as I felt too shy to begin with one of his own compositions, I played Mozart's great C major concerto, which begins with a series of chords. Beethoven soon became attentive, came closer to my chair, and, in those passages in which I had only to accompany, played the orchestral theme with his left hand. His hands were densely covered with hair, and the fingers, especially at the tips, were very broad. When he expressed his satisfaction, I summoned up enough courage to perform the Sonata Pathétique, which had just been published, and at last his Adelaide, which my father sang with his rather good tenor voice. When I had ended, Beethoven turned to my father and said, "The boy has talent. I'll teach him myself and accept him as my pupil. Send him to me once a week. But above all, get him Emanuel Bach's textbook on the true manner of performing upon the pianoforte, which he must bring with him next time already." Now, all those who were present congratulated my father on this favorable decision, especially Krumholtz, who was quite enchanted, and my father hurried away at once to find Bach's manual. During the first lessons, Beethoven occupied me exclusively with scales in all the keys, showed me the only right position of the hands, still unknown to most players at that time, the position of the fingers, and particularly the use of the thumb, rules the usefulness of which I did not fully appreciate until a much later time. After this, he made me play through the exercises given in this manual, and above all, drew my attention to the legato, which he himself mastered in so incomparable a manner, and which, at that time, all other pianists considered impracticable, as it was still the fashion, dating from Mozart's time, to play in a clipped, abrupt manner. On one of these mornings, Beethoven, who had not seen me for 2 years and was angry with my father for discontinuing our lessons, came to Prince Lichnowsky's and seemed quite satisfied with my progress. "Didn't I say so at once?" he said. "The boy has talent, but," he added smiling, "his father didn't treat him strictly enough." "Oh, Herr von Beethoven," my father replied good-humoredly, "after all, he's our only child." He was satisfied, too, with my a vista playing when he gave me the manuscript of the C major sonata, opus 53, to play at sight. From this time onwards, Beethoven remained well disposed toward me and treated me as a friend until his last days. I had to correct all the proofs of his new publications, and when, in the year 1805, his opera Leonora was performed, he asked me to arrange it for the piano. He once told me that as a boy he had been careless and rarely made to work, and that his musical education had been a very bad one. However, he continued, I had some talent for music. It was touching to hear him say these words quite seriously, as if no one had known this before him. On another occasion, the conversation turned to the subject of the fame which his name had acquired in the world. Oh, nonsense, he said. I have never dreamed of writing for fame and honor. What weighs on my heart must come out, and that's why I've written. An account by Georg August Greisinger from Seyfried's Reminiscences. When we were still young, I and attaché, Beethoven famous only as a pianist and hardly known as a composer, we met at the house of Prince Lobkowitz. A man who considered himself a great connoisseur of art drew Beethoven into a conversation which centered around the social standing and the inclinations of poets. I wish, said Beethoven with endearing candor, that I were above having to wrangle and bargain with the publishers, and that I could find one who would decide once and for all to pay me an annual salary, in return for which he would have the right to publish everything I compose, and as I shouldn't be slothful in composing. I believe that Goethe has an arrangement of this kind with Cotta, and if I'm not mistaken, Handel's London publisher had a similar one with him. My dear young man, said this gentleman, putting Beethoven in his place, you must not complain, for you are neither a Goethe nor a Handel, nor is there any reason to suppose you will ever be either, for such minds are not born a second time. Beethoven clenched his teeth, cast a contemptuous glance at the gentleman, and would not speak another word to him. Indeed, even much later he spoke of this man's impudence in no uncertain terms. Prince Lobkowitz endeavored to calm Beethoven, and at once, when the subject of this gentleman was raised, said to Beethoven in a friendly way, My dear Beethoven, this gentleman never intended to insult you. Almost traditionally, most people refuse to believe that one of their younger contemporaries will ever achieve as much as the older ones, or the dead, who have already won their reputation. Unfortunately, that's true, Your Grace, replied Beethoven, but I will not and cannot have any truck with persons who will not believe in me simply because I haven't yet established a genuine reputation. To Hofmeister, Vienna, April 8th, 1802. May the devil ride the whole lot of you, gentlemen. What suggests to me that I should write a sonata of that sort? At the time of the revolutionary fever, well, at that time it would have been worth considering. But now that everything is trying to get back into the old rut, Bonaparte has made his concordat with a pope, a sonata of that sort? If at least it were a Missa pro Sancta Maria a tre voci, or a Vespers, etc., well, in that case I should immediately take hold of the brush and write down a credo in unum, in enormous notes weighing a pound each. But good heavens, a sonata of that sort at the beginning of this new Christian age? Ho ho, count me out of that, for nothing will come of it. Now my reply in very quick time. The lady can have a sonata of mine, and indeed I will follow her general plan as far as the aesthetics of the thing is concerned, and without keeping to the suggested keys. The price, about 5 ducats. For that she can enjoy the sonata for a year, during which neither I nor she may publish it. When that year has elapsed, the sonata is mine exclusively, i.e., I can and shall publish it, while she can insist, if she thinks that this will be down to her honor, that I dedicate it to her. Now, God preserve you, gentlemen. My sonata has been well engraved, but you've certainly taken your time. Be a little more prompt in sending my septet out into the world, because the rabble is waiting for it, and as you know, the Empress has it, and there are scoundrels in the imperial city as well as at the imperial court. I cannot offer you any guarantee in this matter, so make haste. Lately, Herr Mollo has once again published my quartets full of mistakes and errata on a large and small scale. They teem in it as fish do in water, i.e. ad infinitum. Questo è una piacere per un autore. That's what I call engraving, for truly my skin has been gravely cut and ripped over these fine editions of my quartets. Now farewell, and think of me as I do of you, even unto death, your faithful Ludwig van Beethoven. The Heiligenstadt Testament to Karl and Johann van Beethoven. For my brothers Karl and Johann Beethoven. O you men who believe or declare that I am malevolent, stubborn, or misanthropic, how greatly you wrong me. You do not know the secret cause behind the appearance. From childhood onwards, my heart and my mind have tended towards a gentle benevolence. I have always been disposed even to accomplish great deeds. Yet only consider that for 6 years I have been suffering an incurable affliction aggravated by imprudent physicians. Year after year, deceived by hope of improvement, finally forced to contemplate the prospect of a lasting illness, whose cure may take years or may be even impossible, born with a fiery, impulsive temperament, sensible even to the distractions of social life, I was yet compelled early in my life to isolate myself, to spend my life in solitude. Even if I was at times, I wished to overcome this. Oh, how harshly I was driven back by the doubly grievous experience of my bad hearing, and yet I could not prevail upon myself to say to men, speak louder, shout, for I am deaf. Oh, how could I possibly admit to being defective in the very sense which should have been more highly developed in me than in other men? A sense which once I possessed in its most perfect form, a form as perfect as few in my profession, surely know or have known in the past. Oh, I cannot do it. Therefore you must forgive me if you should see me draw back, and I would gladly mingle with you. My affliction is all the more painful to me because it leads to such misinterpretations of my conduct. Recreation in human society, refined conversation, mutual effusions of thought are denied to me. Almost quite alone, I may commit myself to social life only as far as the most urgent needs demand. I must live like an exile. When I do venture near some social gathering, I am seized with a burning terror, the fear that I may be placed in a dangerous position of having to reveal my condition. So too it has been with me during the past half year, which I spent in the country. When my reasonable physician ordered me to spare my hearing as much as possible, he almost accorded with my natural disposition, although sometimes overpowered by the urge to seek society, I disobeyed his orders. But what a humiliation when someone standing next to me heard a flute in the distance and I heard nothing, or when someone heard the shepherd sing and again I heard nothing. Such occurrences have brought me to the verge of despair. I might easily have put an end to my life. Only one thing, art, held me back. Oh, it seemed impossible for me to leave this world before I had produced all that I felt capable of producing, and so I prolonged this wretched existence. Truly wretched, because I am cursed with a body so irritable that a somewhat sudden change can plunge me from the best into the worst of states. Patience, so I am told, it is patience that I must now choose to be my guide. I have patience enough. My determination to hold out until it pleases the inexorable fates to cut the thread shall be a lasting one. I sincerely hope. Perhaps there will be an improvement, perhaps not. I am prepared. Already in my 28th year, I have been compelled to become a philosopher. This is no easy matter, more difficult for an artist than for anyone else. Divine One, thou canst see into my inmost thoughts. Thou knowest them. Thou knowest that love of my fellow men and the desire to do good are harbored there. O men, when one day you read these words, reflect that you did me wrong, and let the unhappy man take comfort in his meeting with one of his kind. One who, despite all his natural disabilities, yet did everything in his power to be admitted into the ranks of the worthy artists and men. You, my brothers Karl and Johann, as soon as I am dead, if Professor Schmidt is still alive, ask him in my name to describe my illness and add this document to his account, so that as far as possible, the world may be reconciled with me after my death. At the same time, I declare you both to be the heirs to my small fortune, if one can call it such. Divide it fairly, bear with and help each other. The evil you have done me, as you know yourselves, has long been forgiven you. To you, Brother Karl, I give special thanks for the devotion shown to me in these recent times. It is my wish that you may lead lives better and more free from cares than my own. Recommend virtue to your children, for virtue alone, not money, can grant us happiness. I speak from experience. It was virtue that raised me up, even in my misery. It is owing to virtue and to my art that I did not end my life by suicide. Farewell, and love each other. I give thanks to all my friends, but especially to Prince Lichnowsky and to Professor Schmidt. I desire that the instruments given to me by Prince Lichnowsky be preserved by one of you. Yet let no quarrel rise among you on this account. However, as soon as they can be of more use to you in this way, by all means sell them. How glad I am at the thought that even in the grave I may render you some service. Now it is done. It is with joy that I hasten to meet my death. Should death come before I have had time to develop all my artistic faculties, then in spite of my cruel fate, it will come too soon, and I would wish that its coming might be delayed. Yet even then I shall be content. Does not death liberate me from a state of endless suffering? Come, whenever it pleases thee to come, bravely I shall come out to meet thee. Farewell, and do not quite forget me when I am dead. I have deserved this of you, for often in my lifetime I thought of you, wondering how I could make you happy. Be so. Heiligenstadt, October 6th, 1802. Ludwig van Beethoven. Heiligenstadt, October 10th. So I must bid you farewell, though sadly. Yes, the cherished hope which I brought with me, I came here, of being healed, at least to a certain degree, must now abandon me entirely. As the leaves of autumn fall and withered, so too my hope has dried up, almost as I was when I came here. I leave again. Even the courage, which often inspired me on lovely summer days, is vanished. O Providence, let a single day of untroubled joy be granted me. For so long already, the residence of true joy has been unknown to me. O when, Divine One, may I feel it once more in the temple of nature and of mankind. Never? No, that would be too hard. From a sketchbook, 1804. June 2nd. Finale more and more simple. Likewise, all my piano music. God knows why still my piano music always makes the worst impression on me, especially when it's badly played. To Stefan von Breuning, with a portrait of Beethoven. Behind this portrait, my dear, good Stefan, all that happened between us for a time shall be hidden forever. I know I have rent your heart. My own emotion, which you must surely have noticed, has been sufficient punishment for the offense. Whatever it was that turned me against you, I assure you it was not malice. No, I should never again be worthy of your friendship. It was passion on your part and on mine. But I did feel mistrust of you. Persons who will never be worthy of you or me came between us. I have long intended to send you my portrait, and you know well that it has always been intended for someone. To whom else should I give it with wholehearted friendship but to you, my good, faithful, noble Stefan? Forgive me if I hurt you. I suffered no less than you. When for such a long time I did not see you about me, I felt all the more clearly how dear you are to me and will always be yours. I am sure that you will be eager to embrace me as before. From Grillparzer's Recollections of Beethoven. The first time I saw Beethoven, I was still a boy. It was probably 1804 or 1805, and the occasion was a musical soiree at the house of my uncle, Josef Sohnleitner, who at the time was a partner in a firm of art and music dealers in Vienna. Apart from Beethoven, Cherubini and Abbe Vogler were among those present. Beethoven at that time was still slim, dark, and contrary to his later habit, most elegantly dressed. He wore spectacles, a detail which I remember so well because in later years he ceased to make use of this aid to his rather short sight. I cannot recall whether he himself or Cherubini played during the soiree, but only that, when the servant had already announced supper, Abbe Vogler seated himself at the piano and began to play endless variations on an African theme, which he himself had brought back from its country of origin. The company gradually drifted off to the dining room during his musical exercises. Only Beethoven and Cherubini remained behind. At last, the latter, who also went away, and Beethoven stood alone beside the toiling artist. Finally, Beethoven too lost patience, while Abbe Vogler, now left quite alone, did not cease to caress his theme in every possible shape. I myself had remained behind in dull amazement at the monstrous aspect of the thing. As is apt to be the case with youthful reminiscences, my memory quite fails me after this point. Who sat next to Beethoven at table, whether he talked to Cherubini, whether later they were joined by Abbe Vogler, it seems as if a dark curtain had descended upon all this in my mind. A year or two later, I was living with my parents in Heiligenstadt, a village near Vienna. Our apartment faced the garden, while Beethoven had rented the rooms facing the street. A communal passage leading to the stairs connected the two partitions. My brothers and myself cared little for this extraordinary man. He had grown stouter in the meantime and walked about in untidy, even dirty clothes when, grunting, he shot past us. But my mother, a passionate music lover from time to time, when she heard him play, yielded to the impulse to step out into the communal passage, not near his door, but immediately in front of ours, and to listen with religious awe. This may have occurred a few times when suddenly Beethoven's door was opened, he himself stepped out, observed my mother, hurried back, and immediately afterwards rushed down the stairs with his hat on his head and out of the house. From this moment onwards, he never touched his piano. In vain my mother, when all the means of communications had failed, asked his servant to assure him that not only would no one ever eavesdrop on him again, but that our door to the passage would be kept locked, and all members of the household, instead of using communal stairs, would make a long detour by using only the garden exit. Beethoven remained unrelenting and left his piano untouched until at last late autumn took us back to town. From the sketchbooks, notes on the Pastoral Symphony, 1807. It is left to the listener to discover the situation, Sinfonia Characteristica, or a reminiscence of country life. Every kind of painting loses by being carried too far in instrumental music. Sinfonia Pastorella. Anyone who has the faintest idea of country life will not need many descriptive titles to be able to imagine for himself what the author intends. Even without a description, one will be able to recognize it all, for it is a record of sentiments rather than a painting in sound. Pastoral Symphony, not a painting, but an expression of those sentiments evoked in men by their enjoyment of the country, a work in which some emotions of country life are described. An account by Dr. Julius Becher from Seyfried's Reminiscences. One day at the Viennese inn Zum Golden Lamm, Beethoven observed that several musicians and literary men were engaged in a very lively discussion. He asked one of them what was going on. These gentlemen maintain that the English can neither produce good music nor appreciate it. Meyerseeder replied, "But I don't agree with them." Beethoven said sarcastically, "The English have commissioned several of my works for their concerts and offered me decent payment for them. The Germans, with the exception of the Viennese, are only just beginning to perform my works, and the French consider my music impracticable. Consequently, it is clear that the English know nothing about music. Isn't that so? Ha ha!" He laughed heartily, and the discussion came to an end at once. To Archduke Rudolph, Vienna, 1810. I can see that your Imperial Highness wished to try out the effect of my music, even on the horses. So be it. I will do my best to make sure that the riders, too, turn some skillful somersaults. Well, it really makes me laugh to think how your Imperial Highness consider me on this occasion. For this assuredly, my whole life long I shall remain your most obliging servant, Ludwig van Beethoven. N.B. The desired horse music will reach your Imperial Highness at full gallop. To Goethe, Vienna, April 12, 1811. Your Excellency, this pressing occasion offers me only a moment in which to write to you, for a friend of mine and a great admirer of yours like myself is leaving here in great haste, and to thank you for the long time that I have known you, for I have much known you since my childhood. That is so little for so much. Bettine Bertano has assured me that you would receive me graciously or even as a friend. Yet how could I think of such a reception when I can only approach you with the greatest reverence, with an unspeakable, profound feeling for your splendid creations? You will soon be receiving the music to Egmont, from Leipzig through Breitkopf and Hertel, this glorious Egmont, which, just as warmly as I read it, I have thought over once more, felt and set to music in sympathy with yourself. I should be very glad to have your judgment on it. Even your adverse criticism would be profitable to me and to my art, and accepted as readily as your highest praise. Your Excellency's great admirer, Ludwig van Beethoven. Javier Schneider von Wartensee to Hans Georg Nigeli, Vienna, December 17th, 1811. Beethoven gave me an extremely good reception, and I have already paid him several visits. He is a most extraordinary man. Great thoughts drift through his soul, but he cannot express them in any form but music. He has no command over words. His whole education has been neglected, and apart from his art, he is coarse, but honest and unaffected. He says quite bluntly whatever he may be thinking. In his youth, and even now, he had to struggle with a great many difficulties and unpleasantnesses. This made him moody and gloomy. He curses Vienna and would like to leave. From the emperor to the bootblack, he said, all the Viennese are worthless. I asked him whether he did not accept any pupils. No, he replied, this was a miserable sort of drudgery. He had only one who gave him a great deal of trouble and whom he would like to get rid of if he could. Who is that? Archduke Rudolph. From the autobiography of Louis Spohr. As at the time when I made his acquaintance, Beethoven had ceased to perform either in public or at private gatherings. I was only given a single opportunity of hearing him when, by chance, I went to see him during the rehearsal of a new trio, D major triple time. It was hardly an enjoyable experience, for, to begin with, the piano was badly out of tune, a circumstance which troubled Beethoven little, as, in any case, he could not hear the music, and secondly, scarcely anything remained of the artist's once so greatly admired virtuosity, also because of his deafness. In the forte passages, the poor deaf man struck the instrument with such violence that the strings rattled, while in the piano passages he played so softly that whole bars were inaudible, and the music became unintelligible if one was unable to follow the pianoforte part in the manuscript. I was overpowered by a feeling of deep sorrow when I considered this hard fate. If it is a great misfortune for anyone to be deaf, how can a musician endure it without despairing? Beethoven's chronic melancholia no longer puzzled me. To Amalie Sebald, Teplitz, September 16th, 1812. I, a tyrant, your tyrant? Only a misapprehension can lead you to say such a thing, even though this very judgment shows the difference between our ways of thinking. Not that I blame you for this. Rather, it is fortunate for you. Already since yesterday I have not been feeling quite well, but since this morning the illness has become more pronounced. Something indigestible I have eaten is the cause of it, and the sensitive part of me seems to get hold of the bad as well as the good. Don't, however, apply this to my moral nature. What people say amounts to nothing. They are only people. In most cases, they see only themselves and others, and this precisely is what amounts to nothing. Away with it. Whatever is good and beautiful needs no people. It simply exists without anyone's help, and this, too, seems to be the basis of our association. Farewell, dear Amalie. If tonight the moon seems brighter than to me than it did the sun throughout the day, you will be visited by the very least of all men, your friend Beethoven. September 17th. This is only to report to you that the tyrant is quite slavishly fettered to his bed. That's how it is. I shall be happy to get away with the loss of no more than this one day. Yesterday's walk at daybreak in the woods, where it was very misty, has aggravated my illness and perhaps hindered my recovery. Meanwhile, frolic about with Russians, Lapps, Samoyeds, etc., and don't overdo your singing of the song, Long May He Live. Your friend Beethoven. September. I cannot yet tell you anything definite about myself. Now it seems that I am better. Then again, the illness seems to be taking its old course or about to prolong itself indefinitely. If I could express my thoughts about this illness, my signs as reliable as those by which I express myself in music, I would soon help myself. Today, too, I am still confined to bed. Farewell, and rejoice at your good health, dear Amelie. Your friend Beethoven. Some days later. Dear good Amelie, ever since I left you yesterday, my condition has been deteriorating, and I have not left my bed since last night. I wished to send you news of me today, but then again I thought that by doing so, I should be trying to make myself too important to you, so I refrained. What makes you think that you cannot be anything to me? Let us rather speak of this when we meet. Above all, I have always wished that my presence calmed and soothed you and inspired you with confidence in me. I hope to be better tomorrow, so that a few hours at least may be left to us during your stay here, in which we may edify and cheer each other amidst the beauties of nature. Good night, dear Amelie. Very many thanks for proving your kind disposition towards your friend Beethoven. I shall glance at the Tiege. From Notebooks and Calendars, as transcribed by Fischoff, 1812. Resignation, the most sincere resignation to your fate. Only this can make you capable of the sacrifices which your duty and vocation demand. Oh, hard struggle. Do everything in your power to make all the necessary arrangements for your distant journey. You must find all those things that guarantee the realization of your most treasured wish. Thus, in spite of it all, you must win through by defiance. Be absolutely true to your constant conviction. You must not be human, not for yourself, only for others. For you, there can be no more happiness except within yourself, in your art. O God, give me strength to conquer myself, for nothing must bind me to this life. By behaving in this manner as with A, all is ruined. 1813, May 13th. To refrain from a great action which could be accomplished and remain content to do so. Oh, how different this is from the aimless and idle life which so often manifested itself in me. Oh, terrible circumstances that do not suppress my feeling for domesticity, but prevent its realization. Oh God, God, look down upon this unhappy bee. Do not let it go on much longer in this way. From Notebooks and Calendars, 1814. There is much to be done on earth. Do it soon. Life must not continue. Art demands even this sacrifice. Rest in your recreations, so as to work all the more vigorously in your art. For fate to mankind granted long-suffering courage, Homer. No time passes more swiftly, rolls on faster, than the time when our spirits are wholly occupied, or when I am wholly occupied with my muse. Never overtly show all men the contempt which they deserve, for one can never know when one may need them. The Scottish songs prove with how little constraint a disordered melody can be treated by means of harmony. From Notebooks, Calendars, Sketchbooks, etc., 1815. All that is called life shall be sacrificed to sublime art, a sacrament of art. Let me live even by means of artificial aids, if only such are to be found. If possible, develop the ear instruments, then travel. This you owe yourself, to men and to Him, the Almighty. Only in this way May you be able to develop once more all that has remained latent within you. And a small court, a small chapel, the song of praise to be written in it by me, performed to the glory of the Almighty, the Eternal, the Infinite. Thus may my last days pass, and for future humanity. Handel, Bach, Gluck, Mozart, Haydn's portraits in my room. They can help me to deserve indulgence. Iliad, the 22nd book. But fate now conquers, I am hers, and yet not she shall share in my renown, that life is left to every noble spirit, and that some great deed shall beget that all lives shall inherit. Brûle at the Lamb, how lovely to see my native countryside, to travel to England, then to spend 4 weeks there. My only decree, to remain in the country, how easily this can be fulfilled in any place whatsoever. Here my wretched hearing does not plague me. Does it not seem as if every tree in the countryside said to me, holy, holy, in the forest enchantment? Who can express it all? Should all else fail, even in winter, the country remains, like Gaden, Lower Brûle, etc. Easy to find lodgings at a peasant's, certainly cheap at that time. Sweet stillness in the forest. The wind, which comes already on the second fine day, cannot keep me in Vienna, though it is my enemy. Almighty in the forest. I am happy, blissful in the forest. Every tree speaks through you. O God, what splendor! In such a wooded scene, on the heights there is calm in which to serve him. From Notebooks and Calendars, 1816. With all your works, as with the sonata for violoncello, now, you will insist on appointing the day of publication to the publisher, so that the publishers in London and Germany will not know what the others are doing. For otherwise they will pay less, and there is no need for them to know. You can make it a pretext that someone else has ordered this composition from you. Fate, show your power. We have no mastery over ourselves. Whatever has been determined must be, and so be it then. Endurance, resignation. Thus we may yet gain by the utmost misery and become worthy of God's forgiveness for our faults. You will regard K as your own child. Ignore all gossip, all pettiness, for the sake of this holy cause. Now these circumstances are very hard for you, but he who is above exists. Without him there is nothing. In any case, the token has been accepted. Leave operas and everything else, write only for your orphan, and then a hovel in which you may conclude this unhappy life. Live only in your art, restricted as you are now because of your defective senses. This is yet the only possible form of existence for you. From Fanny Del Rio's Reminiscences of Beethoven. Once he came during the spring and brought us violets with the words, I am bringing you the spring. He had been very ill for a time. He often suffered from colics, and said, one day this will be the end of me. Then I called out to him, as for that, we'll put it off for a long time yet. To which he replied, it's a bad man who doesn't know how to die. Ever since I was a boy of 15, I have known how to die. However, it's true that as yet, I've done little for art. Oh, as far as that's concerned, you can go ahead and die, I said. Thereupon, he replied as if talking to himself, I've got some very different things in mind. Once in a cheerful communicative mood, Beethoven told us about the time he spent at Prince Lichnowsky's. Of the princess he spoke with great respect. He told us how once the prince, in whose house there were several guests during the French invasion, repeatedly tried to persuade him to play something for them on the piano, but how he had refused obstinately, which led to a scene between him and the prince, whereupon Beethoven left the house immediately without regard for anyone. Once he said, it's easy enough to deal with the aristocracy, but it was necessary to have something with which to impress them. About actors, he once said that this play acting in life, displeased and irritated him. At the time, Beethoven was giving lessons to the brother of the Emperor Francis, Archduke Rudolph. I once asked him whether his pupil played well. Yes, when he's in full command of his faculties, was the reply, accompanied by laughter. Also, he once mentioned with a smile that he slapped the Archduke's fingers, and once, when the exalted prince tried to put him in his place, had pointed out a passage by a poet, Goethe, if I am not mistaken, which proved that he was justified. Beethoven always showed us a feeling of profound gratitude and called our care for his nephew and our exertions on his nephew's behalf invaluable. Once he told us that he himself had been brought up on Proverbs and later that he had been taught by a Jesuit. Of his parents he spoke with great love and reverence, but especially liked to speak of his grandfather, whom he called a man of honor. Often he would discuss political institutions with great bitterness and indignation. Also, he was always about to undertake a great journey, perhaps to England. Once, too, he told us that he had received English visitors laughing. He said, "They've taken my pen away from me." To Karl Czerny, Vienna, 1817. My dear Czerny, I beg you to be as patient as possible with Karl, even if until now he is not doing as well as you and I should wish. Otherwise he will achieve even less. But he must not be told of this. The bad arrangement and timing of his lessons is making too great a demand on him. Unfortunately, this cannot be put right at once, and you must, therefore, practice kindness whenever possible, but not without seriousness, and we shall soon have more success with K in his present really unfavorable circumstances. With regard to his playing, when he is with you, I beg you that once he uses the right fingers, keeps the right time, and plays the notes more or less correctly, that only then you will criticize his rendering, and once he has got so far, you will not interrupt his playing because of small mistakes, but will point these out only when he has ended the piece. Although I have given few lessons, I have always followed this method, for it soon forms musicians, and this above all is one of the foremost aims of art, and is less tiring for both master and pupil. For certain passages such as, I also wish all the fingers to be used at times, also for passages like the following, so that they may be played in a gliding manner. It is true such passages sound pearly, as the phrase goes, played with few fingers or like a pearl, but there are times too when other jewels are more desirable. More at another time, I hope that you will receive all this in the same spirit of love which I have expressed and conceived it. In any case, I still remain your debtor. May my sincerity always serve you as a security for the payment of this debt. Your true friend, Beethoven. From Ludwig Kramelini's Reminiscences. When I caught an unusually large butterfly, I brought it to him and asked him what it was called. Sometimes he told me the name. At other times he said crossly, "Leave me alone, little murderer, tormenting spirit," and muttered to himself. If at that time I had even faintly guessed how great a man was Beethoven, I could certainly have collected hundreds of autographs without his being aware of it. Once he gave me a groschen for returning a sheet of manuscript paper that he had lost, but I would not accept it under any circumstances. Thereupon he said, "You're a pig-headed little fellow like all those called Louis." However, when he offered me the same coin in my mother's presence, when I looked at her questioningly to discover whether I might accept it, she nodded her consent. I offered Beethoven my hand to thank him, and embracing me he said, "You see, rascal, that's the way to catch you. But I'm pleased with your countenance. I was just the same myself, you little shrimp." One day Beethoven was visited by a certain Count Montecuccoli, who was very musical and is said to have played the oboe with virtuosity. Beethoven was very ill-tempered and did not wish to receive Montecuccoli at all. The Count, however, persisted in his intention and went into the garden where Beethoven was sitting in loud conversation with a maid. Montecuccoli spoke at great length about some composition of Beethoven's, saying that the passage in question could not be played by any oboist as it stood. Beethoven would have to alter it. Beethoven replied sharply, "You, Count, are probably incapable of playing it, but a competent oboist could certainly do so. I therefore advise you to take some lessons. I haven't time to listen to you any longer." Montecuccoli called Beethoven a bore, but in such a way that he could not hear it, and walked away. My mother, who had overheard the whole conversation in a nearby bower, went up to Beethoven and said, "You should be ashamed of yourself, Herr von Beethoven, to receive such a fine gentleman and let him see you in a torn shirt collar and torn cuffs, and to treat people so roughly." Beethoven asked her, "Was I really rough with that troublesome ass? I'm delighted to know it. In that case, perhaps he'll leave me alone in the future. But as far as my torn linen is concerned, I beg you to do me the favor of having a half-dozen shirts made for me. I'm always forgetting about it, and so is my sister-in-law." My mother obeyed his wish, and whenever he wore one of the new shirts, he would say to her, "Well, Frau von Cromolini, I suppose that now you're satisfied with my appearance?" Soon afterwards, my mother moved to Vienna, and she never again, unfortunately, came into contact with Beethoven. She was very indignant that Beethoven never visited her in Vienna to thank her for all those little services. He is and always will be a grumpy old bear, and yet one can't really be angry with him, for it's all due to his deafness. From Ludwig Cromolini's Reminiscences. When we entered, the poor man lay on his sickbed, gravely ill with dropsy. He looked at me with wide and shining eyes, then with a smile extended his left hand to me and said, "So that's little Louis, and even engaged to be married now." Thereupon he nodded to Nanny and said, "A pretty couple, and as I've heard and read, a pair of fine artists. Well, how is your dear mother?" He handed us paper and pencil, and we conducted the ensuing conversation in writing, while he spoke at times, but rather unintelligibly. Then he asked us to sing something for him. Schindler sat down at one of the two grand pianos which stood close together in the center of the room, and we stood facing Beethoven. I wrote down for him that I should sing his Adelaide, which had really established my reputation as a singer. Beethoven nodded kindly, yet when I was about to sing, my throat and gums had grown so dry with apprehension that it was impossible for me to sing. I asked Schindler to wait a few moments while I collected myself. Beethoven asked what was going on and why I was not singing, and laughed out loud when Schindler wrote down the reason for him. Then he said, "Do go ahead and sing, dear Louis, for, as you know, unhappily, I can't hear anything. I only wish to see you sing." At last I plucked up courage, and with genuine emotion sang the song of all songs, Beethoven's divine Adelaide. When I had finished, Beethoven beckoned me over to his bed, cordially pressing my hand, said, "I could see from your breathing that you sang correctly, and I could read in your eyes that you feel what you are singing. You have given me great pleasure." I was overjoyed at the great man's judgment and had to dry a tear. When I wished to kiss his hand, he withdrew it quickly and said, "Do this to your good mother and give her my regards repeatedly, and tell her what a great pleasure it was, for that she still remembers me, and sent me a little Louis." Now Nanny sang the great aria by Leonora from Fidelio, and with such feeling that Beethoven often beat time to her singing, seemed to devour her with his wide eyes. After the aria, Beethoven kept his eyes covered with his hands for some time. Then he said, "I am sure that you are a masterly singer, and that you possess a voice which may well recall that of Midler, who, however, did not command such depth of feeling as I read distinctly in your face. What a great pity that I cannot—" Probably he wished to say, "hear you," but he broke off and said, "I thank you, Fraulein, for this fine hour," moved and pressed his hand to her heart. There was a little pause, and Beethoven said, "I do feel rather unwell." We prepared to leave, but not without writing down our thanks with an apology for disturbing his rest, and the wish that God might soon restore him to perfect health. To this Beethoven replied with a smile, "Then I shall write an opera for you both. Do convey all my good wishes to your father and to your dear little mother, and should I get well again, I shall ask Schindler to fetch you. Adieu, my dear little Louis, and adieu to my dear Fidelio." We pressed our hands again, gazed at us sorrowfully, but kindly, and finally turned his head to the wall. To B. Schott's Sons, Vienna, March 1st, 1827. I now repeat my request in my last letter, that is, my request for old, white Rhine or Moselle wine. Here it is infinitely difficult to obtain anything of the kind, pure and unadulterated, even at the greatest cost. Some days ago, on February 27th, I had my 4th operation, and still my complete improvement and recovery are not yet in sight. Pity your devoted and respectful friend, Beethoven, M.P. Note: these bottles of wine arrived 2 days before Beethoven's death. From Grillparzer's Recollections of Beethoven. I saw him only once more, but cannot remember where. At that time he said to me, "Your opera is finished." I cannot say whether he meant finished in my head, or whether those countless notebooks of his, in which he used to jot down isolated thoughts and passages for future use in a manner intelligible only to himself, did perhaps contain the elements of this opera in the form of fragments. What is certain is that after his death not a single note of it was found, nor anything that could have been unquestionably related to our collaboration. Yet I remain true to my resolution never to remind him of it, even in the most delicate manner, and, as our written conversations were troublesome to me, never approached him again in a black suit and burning torch in my hand. 2 days earlier, Schindler came to see me in the evening with news that Beethoven was dying and that his friends wished me to prepare an oration which the actor Anschutz would deliver at his grave. I was more shattered, as I had scarcely known that he was ill, yet I endeavored to collect my thoughts, and on the following morning began to write the oration. I had got to the second half when Schindler entered once more to fetch what he had ordered, for Beethoven had just died. At that moment there was a terrible commotion within me. Tears poured from my eyes, as was usually the case when I was overwhelmed by genuine emotion. I could not complete the oration as weightily as I had begun it. Incidentally, it was delivered to the funeral guests, departed with awed emotion, and Beethoven was no longer among us. From Grillparz's oration at Beethoven's funeral, March 29, 1827. As we stand here at the grave of this departed, we are, as it were, representatives of a whole nation, of the entire German people, mourning the fall of the one highly celebrated half of what remained to us of the vanished splendor of native art, the flower of our country's spirit. True, the hero of poetry in the German language is still with us, and long may he remain with us. But the last master of resounding song, the sweet lips that gave expression to the art of tones, the heir and successor of Handel's and Bach's, of Haydn's and Mozart's immortal fame, has ended his life, and we stand weeping beside the tattered strings of the silent instrument. Of the silent instrument let me call him so, for he was an artist, and all that he was became only by virtue of his art. The thorns of life had wounded him deeply, and as the shipwrecked cling to the shore, so he fled into thy arms, glorious sister, alike of goodness and truth, consoler of the suffering, art whose origins are above. He held fast to thee, and even when the gate was closed, through which thou hadst entered into him and had spoken to him, when he had grown blind to thy features because of his deaf ears, still he bore thy image in his heart, and when he died, still it lay upon his breast. He was an artist, and who can bear comparison with him? As a behemoth rushes, tempestuous over the oceans, so he flew over the frontiers of his art. From the cooing of doves to the rolling of thunder, from the most subtle interweaving, the self-determined media of his art, to the awe-inspiring point where the consciously formed merges in the lawless violence of the striving forces of nature, all these he exhausted, all these he took in his stride. Whoever comes after him will not be able to continue. He will have to begin again, for his predecessor ended only where art itself must end. He was an artist, but he was a man too, a man in the highest sense. Because he shut himself off from the world, they called him malevolent, and because he avoided sentiment, they called him unfeeling. Oh, the man who knows himself to be hard does not flee. The finest points are those which are most easily blunted, bent, or broken. Excessive sensibility recoils from sentiment. He fled the world because in the whole realm of his loving nature he could find no weapon with which to oppose it. He withdrew from men after he had given them everything and received nothing in return. He remained solitary because he could find no second I. But even unto his grave he preserved a human heart for all those who are human, a paternal heart for those who were his kin, himself as a heritage to the whole world. Thus he lived, thus he died, thus he shall live forever.